Hey everybody, thanks very much for joining me this evening. I suppose in many ways it's instrumental because I never thought that 20 years on I would still be teaching the Buteyko method. It has been a wonderful journey, and I just said I'd have this day just to say thanks very much to those of you, your support over the years. I see some of your names there, and it has been gone over a number of years. You might ask what was the initial reason I came behind the Buteyko method. I found it by accident. I was a kid growing up with asthma and sleep disorder breathing. And you can kind of learn to deal with asthma. You can learn to deal with sleep disorder breathing. But the one thing that it really impacted was my concentration and my attention span. And school for me, and especially high school, was very frustrating. And at 14 years of age, I left school altogether, never to go back. So that was my drive at that point. Now, my intention back then was to become a shop manager. So I was working as a trainee shop manager in a store in Dunboyne, County Meath, where I grew up. But I went back to school 1 year later, and I was really driven to try and get results, and I got the results, but it took a lot of work. It could have been a lot easier. So the whole 20 years ago, breathing was it was really under the custodians of yoga. And in some ways that was great, but in other ways it wasn't so good. I was a mouth breathing child and a teenager with mouth breathing, with sleep disorder breathing. And I wouldn't have got any information from the yoga community back then because this information wouldn't have been out there. So turning to something like the Buteyko method, and I knew it worked pretty straight away. And the reason being is because I had a stuffy nose and I did the nose and blocking exercise, which is free up on YouTube. You'll see it on our channel. And it brought me relief. And you can test this also with your own child. You know, ask your child to put your phone underneath their nose like so. Have the child breathe onto the screen. Check the halo that's left on the screen because of the moisture. It will give you some idea what side of the nose is a little bit more congested than the other. And then have the child do the nose and blocking exercise. Have them do it 5 or 6 times and see if it opens up or if it increases the halo on the screen, which will give you a good idea whether the nose is becoming decongested. Something like that is quick, and I was able to get results in terms of opening up the nose in a few minutes. So I knew there was something there. And the second reason I knew there was something in it was when I was starting to breathe light. And by breathing light and under breathing, and I wasn't doing it right at all, I was making a total mess of it, but I felt suffocated. So I was deliberately taking less air in not to deprive, but to reduce the volume of breathing. And with that, I was feeling air hunger, but I was able to increase the temperature of my fingers. So it was a few years later, I wanted to teach it. And I traveled over to Moscow, and Dr. Buteyko was alive at the time. And it's kind of, strange as what's going on in the world with Ukraine and the illegal invasion by Russia. And Dr. Buteyko is a Ukrainian, and he's from the Ukraine. He was born in Kiev, and he's buried in Crimea, which up until about 2014 was considered to be part of Ukraine. So Dr. Buteyko, I probably feel, especially at this time, that there is this very strong affiliation to the people of Ukraine, given that a technique that I've been using and that many of you have been using has originally came from a person born in Ukraine. So I was fortunate enough; he was alive at that time, and I was lucky enough to speak with him a few times. And I started teaching then the Buteyko method in Ireland. Now, how do you start teaching something that nobody knows absolutely anything about? I reached out to a local newspaper called the Galway Advertiser. They wrote an article, and that got me my first 3 clients. And because I had kept my costs really, really low, I shared an office, a one-room office. I lived in my now wife's parents' front room. I didn't have a car. I didn't have rent. I kept costs to an absolute minimum. And I just worked at trying to put it out there, and it worked. So it took that length of time. And I would say to people, sometimes you feel that something is not going to work, but It's amazing how things can fall into place. And I've been very, very fortunate. And I think this is just a human endeavor. When there is something that we set our eyes on, and the beauty about the breath is that it does help to give you some focus, because before I would have been totally stuck in my head. And by taking attention out of the mind and onto your breathing, it does bring you into the present moment. And I'm not just talking about present moment, what we hear, because many people talk about present moment, but I'm talking about having your absolute attention on doing what you're doing. So this evening, I'm due to speak at the World Sleep Congress in Rome here. So I'm in Rome at the moment on Thursday. And I took a walk down to the Colosseum because it's only a few yards down the road. And I looked at the Colosseum and just stood there looking. And the one thing about when you have that degree of control of where you're directing your attention, it allows you to really see what's in front of you. Before, if this was 25 years ago or 30 years ago and the Colosseum was in front of me, I would hardly have seen it. I'd have got a glimpse of it. But I wouldn't have been able to put my attention on what I was saying because my attention was stuck in my head. And it was the same with academia and going through life in general. So the Colosseum today, I could enjoy the sunshine and feel it. I could listen to what was going on around me. And I could absolutely see, without having the clutter of the mind going on in the background. And that allows you to appreciate and to savor the experiences in life that we come across all the time. But if we're stuck in our head, we don't really garner that, I suppose, experience, because how can you experience anything if we're stuck in the head? And the one thing about the Buteyko method is that on so many levels, for people who are trapped in thought, when you start breathing lightly, it helps to bring the body into balance, the body and mind into balance. It stimulates what's called the vagus nerve, this nerve that's wandering throughout the human body. And 80 to 90% of the nerve fibers of the vagus nerve are from the body up to the brain. So by doing the Buteyko method and really softening your breathing and slowing down your breathing and under breathing, not by holding your breath. And it's not that you need to do this all day long. You just need to do it for pockets, different times throughout the day, and try and bring it into your way of life, because that's the best way to sustain it. So by doing that, you have to stimulate the vagus nerve, which in turn will secrete a neurotransmitter called acetylcholine, which causes the heart rate to slow down. And when the heart rate is slowing down, it's helping to dampen any stress response and activate the body's relaxation response and to bring you into balance. The other aspect of it is that when you're breathing light, you can improve blood flow to the brain. And I'll give you the opposite story of that. I was going into an exam, and I've spoken about this in different podcasts. I went to a university in Dublin, Trinity College in Dublin. I was a student there from 1992 until 1997. I'm not sure which year the exam was, but I think it was my third or fourth year. It was one of the more serious exams. I was a little bit anxious going in because, number one, I was a mouth breather all the time, pretty much. I was always waking up with dry mouth in the morning, waking up feeling tired. And when you breathe through an open mouth, you typically breathe fast, because your mouth, there's very little resistance to your breathing during the day by breathing through your mouth, whereas your nose slows down your breathing. So mouth breathers will typically breathe faster, but they also breathe shallow. So if you put in a combination of fatigue, mouth breathing, fast breathing, shallow breathing, well, that's an increased stress response. So now this student, which was myself at the time, going in to do an exam, you're already feeling a bit angst anyway about it, but physiologically you're completely thrown off. And I went and I took this walk for about 2 to 3 minutes just before I went into the exam. And I took these full big breaths, because this was the idea that was around at that time. And this is still probably the idea in many quarters. So by taking these full big breaths, I walked into the exam hall and I was completely all over the place. I couldn't concentrate, I couldn't focus, and feeling lightheaded. And it's a normal physiological response that when you breathe hard and full big breaths, it's not increasing blood flow and oxygen delivery to the brain. You're getting rid of too much carbon dioxide from the blood, and this is causing blood vessels to constrict and less oxygen to get to the brain. So I was one student going in there, but how many students? How many students are required to sit exams? And physiologically, they are mouth breathers, they are faster breathers, they are upper chest breathers. And these kids are not going to fare as well. These kids are really going to be held back, not because these kids are not intelligent. These kids can be highly intelligent. But if your physiology is off and if you're not getting a good night's sleep and if your breathing is faster and harder, that is going to impact your ability to do well in any exam. It's also going to impact your ability to retain information, because how on earth can you study something if your attention is stuck in the head? So the Buteyko methods for me, um, the one thing that it's really did was it has given me a quality of life that is so much softer than if I didn't have it. And I'm not sure how would it be if I didn't have it, but I would certainly um, be more stressed, much more stressed. And when you in sometimes when you're in your 20s and you're wondering how is life going to work out for you, and I'm nearly 50 now, and it's amazing how things do fall into place. But I think we do need a purpose, and I was lucky. I found a purpose. I found something that I love to do, and if anybody, youngster was talking to me and asking me what is the determinants of success, well, I suppose it really determines what you see as success. But overall, it's about happiness, because I came out of TCD and into the business world, into the corporate world, and I didn't like it at all. I didn't like the stress that was heaped upon us. I didn't like the monthly meetings or the weekly meetings. The fact that we had put so much pressure on the employees underneath us, um, and things were never satisfied. You'd achieve one week, but that was only a marker to improve it for the following week. So it really is. And for me back then, it was tough going. I could have been successful in the outer world of things, that people would say that yes, he's successful, he's a company car, he's this, that, and the other. But I wasn't happy. I absolutely hated going in of a Monday morning. And so my point here is that the traditional jobs which university kids are coming out into, those jobs may not be suitable for those kids. And again, you have to ask the question then, why was the corporate world difficult for me? Was it because I just didn't like the constant pressure and the fact that you were controlled by IT and all of that stuff? Or was it that my physiology was thrown off? And I think it was a bit of both. I think because of the poor sleep. And without a shadow of a doubt, if you do not get that deep sleep, you're not going to be able to cope with the life stresses and strains. You won't even feel in good form. Now, every now and again, of course, every one of us is going to have a poor night's sleep every now and again. But what I'm talking about is I'm talking about people with chronic insomnia, people with sleep apnea, which is undiagnosed, and heavy snoring. So yeah, sleep is absolutely the key part of it. And the elephant in the room, it's going to be surprising, because I'm talking at this sleep congress now in Rome on Thursday, and there will be many eminent sleep doctors there. I'm just wondering how many of them are going to be talking about nose breathing during sleep. And that for me was a total game changer when back in 1998, 1997, I came across originally the Buteyko method, and I started practicing it for myself. And that night, I put 3M 1-inch micropore tape across my lips, and I put a nasal dilator across my nose to open up my nose. So I taped my mouth closed, and I woke up the first morning. I don't really remember much of a difference, but all that next day, I continued nasal breathing. And the second morning, I woke up, and it was the best night's sleep that I had in about 15 or 20 years. I couldn't remember ever before waking up with feeling alert, not feeling groggy, not feeling that it takes you hours to get around. Um, so these are the small things, but how long is it going to take for these small, simple things to get into mainstream? How long is it going to take for education systems to realize that there are many children who can be struggling due to their physiology and poor sleep, and these kids are not going to thrive academically? How long is it going to take for the corporate world and the business students. The business students who are leaving business colleges, and other students, of course, as well, but they are not taught about the ability to handle stress. And the one thing about the breath is that we can control our breathing, we can control the mind. And even if a student was to realize nose breathing is absolutely vital, because with nose breathing, you tend to breathe lighter, slower, and lower. Lighter, slower, and lower, your body is more likely to be in balance and mind, as opposed to mouth fast and shallow. And also with nose breathing, you're less likely to hyperventilate. And I used the example that was in Dr. Rangan Chatterjee's podcast in May of 2021. He was talking to a brain surgeon called Dr. Rahul. And Dr. Rahul said that when he gets into a tricky situation, the first thing he does is prevents himself from hyperventilating. And he said, Dr. Rahul said that people think that I'm born with nerves of steel or I'm made with nerves of steel. Now, of course, the doctor here in this instance has control over his physiology. But why doesn't the corporate worker have control over their physiology, or the students, or the family person? In every single walk of life, in the sports world, police, military, it's really important that we as human beings, that we have some control over our physiology, that we are able to practice simple techniques that regardless of what's happening on the outside, that we can remain clear-headed and calm, at least to some degree. Because when you think of it this way, whenever we are confronted with a difficult situation, and it depends on person to person, we will invariably react with faster breathing, harder breathing, mouth breathing, hyperventilation. And when we breathe like that, all the brain wants to do is to get us out of the situation. The brain is here to protect the body. The brain is launching us into this fight or flight. So whenever we're getting into a difficult situation and we react with faster breathing, harder breathing, upper chest breathing, and the brain wants us to get out of the situation, it's not a time for planning. It's not a time for clear-headed thinking. It's not a time for decision making, but it's a time for fight or flight. So how can we help to prevent that? Well, all we have to do is think of the breath. And we can think of Buteyko here when he spoke about nose breathing. And it's not just about nose breathing, but taking a very soft breath in through your nose and the really, really relaxed and a slow and a gentle exhalation. So when you take the soft breath coming in through your nose and a really relaxed and a slow and a gentle exhalation, and then a very, very soft breath coming into your nose, almost that you're hardly breathing at all, and a really relaxed and a slow and a gentle exhalation. There's a few things happening there. Number one is your breathing is lighter. Carbon dioxide is increasing in the blood if you feel air hunger. And this helps to stimulate the vagus nerve. And this helps to dampen the stress response. Number two, you're having that really slow and relaxed exhalation. And the slow and relaxed exhalation, the brain is interpreting that the body is safe. And as a result, then the brain will send signals of calm to the body. So whenever anybody is in a difficult situation, bring your attention inwards. Nobody will even know you're doing it. And as you bring your attention inwards, take that really soft, gentle breath coming into your nose and that relaxed and slow, gentle breath out. And all it takes is 90 seconds. 90 seconds will help to dampen that stress response. So what I would say is, though, don't wait for the situation to unfold. Start with small things. You know, you might be watching the news. You might be watching something on television, which is, you know, people are giving out or whatever. When you see confrontation and tension on the television, immediately bring your attention inwards and practice that. Don't surrender your attention to the TV set. Don't surrender your attention to the news. Bring your attention inwards. Take a really soft breath in and a relaxed and slow, gentle breath out. Because if you start doing that with small instances, then whenever there is a difficult situation that occurs in real life, you will automatically be able to hone in on that. And I'm not going to say that it absolutely works perfect, but I've used it many, many, many times. And the one thing about this is that with breathing and having your attention on the breath, but not just about nose breathing, having deep sleep, which is achieved with light breathing and slow breathing and low breathing, and having that state of mind, you typically are calmer anyway. And even when things go wrong, as things do go wrong, you're able to get back up on the horse. You're not dwelling in it. And you're also more conscious of what's going on in the mind. So when people talk about awareness, like, what is awareness? What is awareness other than we have some understanding or some idea of what we are thinking about? What is consuming our attention? What are we ruminating on? And oftentimes the thoughts that we are ruminating on, they're often critical. Somebody did something to us 10 years ago. They did it to us once, and we've been doing it to ourselves ever since. So by making it a constant kind of that the breath is always with us, and it's something lovely and there's nothing new agey with this. And that's really where I felt too that this has been let down. Breathing is not left of field. It's absolutely not left of field, and nor is it right of field, because we have to think of it that if it's too woo-woo and airy-fairy, it's going to put too many people off. But it's nothing about that, You don't have to be having all of the paraphernalia to be practicing breathing techniques. And right of field, medical doctors in the main are not interested in it anyway. So where is breathing? Well, breathing is for the people. Breathing is mainstream. And that's where it should be at. And it's the foundation. The very basic functions of health we can influence through the breath. And I'm not going to say that it's a cure-all, even though the word cure was used in the title of one of the books. But if you think of the major disciplines of health, and sleep is number one, respiration, mental health, dentistry, all of those can be impacted and influenced by how well you breathe. And that's where it's going now, So with regards to when I started off 20 years ago, it was very much in its infancy. And I was lucky. I kept costs to an absolute minimum. And clients came to me. And, I had so much help off people who had came to the courses, and then word of mouth spread. And I realized back then as well that I wasn't going to get referrals from the medical community. I realized that back in 2002 and 2003. I wasn't going to get referrals from the Asthma Society of Ireland. So my way to help get the information out there was to write books, because I figured that if I could write a book, and if the book sold for 10 or 15 euro or 10 or 15 dollars, for a cost of 10 or 15 dollars, I was able to get the information into the hands of the person who needed it most. And these are the mothers, the fathers, the grandparents. And this way, people are not taking a risk then when they came to do a course, because they already knew what was involved because they had read the book. And more likely, they were practicing it already from the book. So by making it so simple to get the information into the hands of the general public, I think that's what has given me longevity. Initially, I worked for about 5 or 6 years solely with asthma. And then from 2007, I started looking into the whole area of sleep, snoring, insomnia, and obstructive sleep apnea. And this is a huge one. When you think of the number of individuals with sleep disorder breathing and insomnia, and it's not diagnosed, and the impact it is having on their overall health, their productivity, their states of mind. And then in 2010, then I started bringing together mindfulness with functional breathing, Buteyko mindfulness method, I called it, because I felt that mindfulness is wonderful, but it's not going to be so helpful if you've got poor sleep, and if your physiology, if your breathing is in that, if you have breathing pattern disorders, if you have dysfunctional breathing, if your habitual everyday breathing is faster, harder, and upper chest, mindfulness is not going to work. And the reason being is because you're going to get too frustrated. How can you practice mindfulness when your physiology is in a state of turmoil? So why not get sleep right first? Why not get breathing right first? And we can't even look at these functions in isolation, because none of them are in isolation. There's a bi-directional relationship feeding into each. If the emotions are off, if the mind is stressed, it's going to impact our sleep. We're going more likely to have insomnia. If we have a poor night's sleep, we wake up feeling lousy, and that's going to impact our state of mind. So our states of mind impact our sleep, and our sleep impacts our state of mind. Our states of mind impact our breathing. When we're stressed and anxious, our breathing gets harder and faster. So our states of mind impacts our breathing. But also, if we have dysfunctional breathing but harder and faster breathing, that's going to impact our state of mind. And if our breathing is harder and faster and through the mouth, that is going to increase our risk of sleep disorder breathing. So sleep and the emotions and breathing go together. They are hand in hand. And I can't but think of somebody who had come in with depression about 15 years ago. And she had chronic depression. She wasn't that old. She was young. She was in her 30s. And I asked her, I said, how do you feel when you wake up in the morning? And she said she wakes up feeling absolutely exhausted. And I asked her, I said, has anybody ever asked you about your sleep? Has anybody ever asked you, do you wake up feeling alert in the morning? Or do you have insomnia? Are you snoring? Has anybody ever said if you're stopping breathing? Have you ever done a sleep study? Have you ever done questionnaires on sleep? None of that. So here is a person with depression who is waking up feeling chronically exhausted, but yet the sleep component of it had been overlooked. Now, was it the poor sleep which really impacted this person's ability to function in her day-to-day life? Because you can't hold down a job if you're chronically exhausted. You cannot be in good form if you're chronically exhausted. And you're more likely to be anxious. And anxiety over time then can contribute to depression. So what was causing what here? Was it the chronic exhaustion which was feeding into depression? Or was it, as what most people were assuming, it was depression which was causing chronic exhaustion? There's likely to be a bidirectional feedback loop here. So it's not just enough to work with this individual in terms of her depression. We also have to look at her in terms of her sleep. And of course, we have to look at her in terms of her breathing. And I'll give you countless ideas of this. And the only reason that I wanted to talk about this was because I wanted to show, yes, we have made great progress, but we have a hell of a long way to go. And it's really, I've seen the last 3 years have been an amazing journey. I know Tom Hare, and I seen him on earlier on, and he said it's taken you, he said this about 6 months ago or a year ago, he said it's taken you 20 years to become an overnight success. Well, I don't feel whether it's successful or not, but what I do feel is that we have made a difference and we've had to get the information out there, but it wouldn't have happened without you. I'll give you this example. The tens of thousands of children who are undergoing adenoidectomy and tonsillectomy every day for sleep disorder breathing. Because to remove a young child's adenoids, which is lymphatic tissue at the back of the nose, because it can block the airway, it's seen as the gold standard of treatment if the child is having problematic breathing or stopping breathing during their sleep, if they're having sleep disorders. So the tonsils are removed and the adenoids are removed. And it's not a walk in the park, this procedure. But it does help in most instances, but I'll give you kind of the efficacy of it in a paper by Buteyko that was published in the American Journal of Respiratory and Critical Care Medicine. They looked at 578 children who had undergone tonsillectomy and adenoidectomy. Only 27% of these kids had their sleep disorders completely cured. And 73% of these children continue to have sleep disorders post-surgery. So it's pointing out that there's something else going on which is contributing to poor sleep in children. And the importance of this can be pointed out with regards to Karen Bonnock's paper. She looked at 11,000 children. It was published in the journal Pediatrics in 2012. Children with sleep disorders at 5 years of age, if it was untreated, these kids have a 40% increased risk of special education needs by age 8. And the reason being is because their brain is developing during deep sleep. But if they're having sleep disorder breathing, they're not having deep sleep. They're not going down into those deep stages of sleep because they're having sleep fragmentations. They're either waking up, even though they wouldn't be conscious of waking up, but they're being woke out of the deep sleep into the lighter sleep. So it's impacting the development of the brain. So number one, Dr. Christian Guilleminault, while he was alive, spoke and wrote about the critical importance of restoring nasal breathing in children post tonsillectomy and adenoidectomy, because he said children who undergo adenoidectomy and tonsillectomy, there is a 65% worsening in their sleep within 3 years unless nasal breathing is restored. Now, this was published about 5 years ago. There are very few ear, nose, and throat departments who also have a section on respiratory rehabilitation. Can you imagine, as a parent, bringing your child to have their tonsils and adenoids removed, but there is no advice post-surgery on the importance of nasal breathing? And how are you as a parent going to know that there is a 65% worsening? In other words, tonsillectomy and adenoidectomy is short term unless nasal breathing is restored. Now, so when it comes to sleep, we need to be looking at children's sleep from a number of different areas. One is good breathing practice with the mouth closed and the tongue resting on the roof of the mouth, and that child will be breathing light, slow, and low. The second is myofunctional therapy, which is a wonderful adjunct, and the two go hand in hand. And number three are dentists who understand about the airways. There are some tremendous orthodontists, and I have been so fortunate to meet them over the last 10, 15 years. I only started kind of becoming aware of the connection between mouth breathing and development of the face in children back in about 2007 and 2008. And I wrote a book on it in 2010 called Buteyko Meets Dr. Mew. I reached out to Dr. John Mew back then, and I told him, my name is Patrick McKeown, I work with breathing, I would love to meet you. And he said, of course. So I went over, and I was lucky enough to be able to sit in their clinic and sit there while they were working with the patients, and the parents also were there as well. So I had an opportunity to talk to the parents and to see firsthand what they were doing. Dentists and orthodontists really need to understand about the airway. And when a dentist is looking into, as many dentists do understand this, when they're looking into a child or an adult's mouth, they can identify the telltale factors, those risk signs of whether this child has a sleep problem or this adult has a sleep problem. So in the child, you're looking for the mouth-breathing kid. You're looking for the child with a face like mine, that the maxilla, which is the top jaw, is set back, and the mandible, which is the lower jaw, is a little bit set back. You're looking for high narrow palate, because that's also a telltale sign. If the palate is high and narrow, the face hasn't developed wide as wide as it should be. But if the palate is high, the nasal cavity is infringed, and the child will have difficulty breathing through the nose. So anatomically, their airway is compromised. Wouldn't it be wonderful for dentists to spot that? And also for adults going into the dental surgery, that the dentist is able to check, is there scalping of the tongue, which the dentist will see it anyway. Is the person mouth breathing? And has this person got the risk factors associated with sleep disorder breathing? And this is going to happen, So where is it going with this? And I'm going to go through your comments, and thanks so much as well for the comments. Where do I see this in the next 20 years? Well, maybe it's not going to take 20 years. Maybe it's going to take 5 years. Could take 10 years. Number one is I see the potential of breathing in yoga. And I'm not saying that yoga instructors aren't already working with breathing, but where I see the real potential is as follows. Yoga instructors to be able to assess people's breathing patterns using simple breath hold time, which is taken from the Buteyko method. Yoga instructors to understand breathing from a number of different dimensions, the biochemistry, that it's not just about taking these full big breaths, that when the yoga instructor actively has their students breathe light to the point of air hunger, this helps to improve their tolerance to carbon dioxide. This helps to improve their blood circulation. This helps to improve oxygen delivery to the tissues. This helps to open up the airways. This helps to stimulate the vagus nerve. For the yoga instructor to talk about the importance of nose breathing, both on the mat but off the mat, to help the person sleep, to help the person's mental health, to help the person's physical exercise. And for the yoga instructor to understand the biomechanics, which they are already doing, but the connection between the nose and the diaphragm. Because if we are focusing on the biomechanics, which When I'm talking about the biomechanics, I'm talking about the main muscles involved with breathing. In other words, are we breathing fast up our chest, or are we breathing slow and low with good recruitment of the diaphragm and also lateral expansion and contraction of the sides? And also for yoga instructors to bring in resonance frequency breathing. So to realize that breathing, while it's a little bit more complex and multidimensional, it's actually quite simple. And here I can think of millions of students going into a yoga practice, students going in with anxiety, because many of them are going to yoga to help with their own anxiety, going in with depression, going in with sleep issues, going in with asthma, children going to yoga, helping those kids breathe properly with correct tongue resting posture. So can you imagine that now yoga instructors having that all embracing knowledge of the power of the breath from a number of different dimensions could absolutely transform their students' lives. The second group that I think there's massive potential, depending on the willingness of them to embrace it, is the medical doctor. And I'm talking here specifically about people with respiratory complaints, asthma. The reason being is because this is something that is so dear to myself, having had the condition for 20 years. And when you have asthma, you don't just have asthma. You're also more likely to be tired. You're also more likely to be stressed. And the reason being is because if you have asthma, you've got a greater likelihood of having dysfunctional breathing, faster breathing, harder breathing, upper chest breathing. And also with the asthma, you're more likely to have a stuffy nose. And if you have a stuffy nose, you are 2 to 3 times more likely to have moderate to severe sleep disorder breathing. So can you imagine the medical doctor and the respiratory consultant who understands the importance of nose breathing for asthma and for helping his patients and her patients, and also for sleep? Because I'm going to say that the elephant in the room when it comes to respiration and sleep is the importance of nose breathing, but it has been completely overlooked. If you look into your mouth, and if you ask yourself the question, what does the mouth do in terms of breathing? It has zero functions, none. There is no part of the mouth which is designed to serve any role in terms of the breath coming into the human body. The mouth is nothing more than a hole. It's an entry point, and we have to think of that our ancestors only reverted to mouth breathing in times of an emergency. So if our ancestors reverted to mouth breathing when they were in absolute fight or flight, well, what's happening now if mouth breathing has become our chronic and persistent habit? It's also putting the body and mind into that fight or flight. We would love to see the medical doctor embracing the importance and actively teaching their patients to breathe through their nose, to breathe light, to breathe slow, and to breathe low. It improves gas exchange. It reduces the amount of air lost to dead space. It improves alveolar ventilation. It's known since 1988 that it increases the pressure of oxygen in the blood by 10%. And also when you do physical exercise with your mouth closed, you've got increased carbon dioxide in the blood, which in turn allows more oxygen to get to the working muscles. How many patients going into medical doctors and respiratory consultants with respiratory complaints and sleep problems, and they also have poor breathing, and their breathing is not being looked at? Now, there are some wonderful ear, nose, and throat doctors. I wrote a paper in January of 2021. It was published with 2 ENTs, Dr. Carlos O'Connor and Dr. Guillermo Plaza. And there are also some wonderful respiratory consultants in different countries throughout the world. But what I'm talking about is I'm talking about the institution. I'm talking about the teaching universities. Why doesn't nasal breathing be part of their curriculum? After all, they work with respiration, and the mouth does nothing in terms of respiration. Why aren't they talking about the importance of nasal breathing to help their patients breathe better and sleep better? And then the third group, which I think is making really good inroads, is the dental profession and the orthodontic profession. And the reason being is, again, it's a group of stellar dentists and orthodontists who have really got behind this. And I think part of the reason that they are so instrumental is because they realized it wasn't necessarily when they were working with their patients, it was when they were working with their own children that they realized something was not quite the way it should be. That their training when they come out of university, while their training as the gold standard was applied to their patients, when they were working with their children, and this is the personal stories and the feedback that many dentists and orthodontists have given me, when you're working with your children, you're able to monitor your children every minute, every hour that you're there, and you're able to see if things are not progressing the way it should do. And when they were seeing that things maybe were not progressing the way they should be progressing, if the child has poor habits such as tongue thrust or tongue tie, thumb sucking, mouth breathing, nasal obstruction. So coming back then to this group, the future of this is going to be in the hands of yoga instructors. The future of this is going to be in the hands of the medical doctors who are actively working with their patients. And the future of this is going to be in the hands of dentists and orthodontists. But ultimately, what's more important, the future of this is in the hands of the mothers and fathers and the grandparents, because that's where I saw the future back in 2002 by putting it out there in the books. And that's where I see the future now. So if you look at the trajectory of this, we now have about 3,000 instructors across 50 countries. We have a support staff of about 11 people. And I never would have imagined in my wildest dreams it would have ever got to this. I think I've written about 9 books. I've written 8 in the English language, but there was another book that was published, I think, only in Polish. So 8 or 9 books. Look at the work of James Nestor, and look at the work of also Buteyko instructors and Oxygen Advantage instructors throughout the world who've really been pushing this out here. So I'm just going to, thanks very much for your comments, and hello to Dermot and Monica. Thank you so much. And Dee. So, and Louise, Move Better Fitness Academy, Acupuncture and More. Richard Schramm, I'm probably pronouncing your name incorrectly. Thank you. Rhonda McCrory, M. Lemon, Iwona, The Smart of Art, great name. The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle, absolutely. One of my most favorite books. So after Buteyko, Eckhart Tolle is probably the most influential person I have ever came, in that his material came to me absolutely at the right time, and something that I continue to use to this present day. And that's where it should be at. And that's why the future of education is going to embrace the ability for one directed attention, and to be able to, it's not just about mindfulness, it's going beyond that. It's about changing the physiology, it's about changing our sleep. And it's also about realizing that our concentration, our attention span, our focus, because wherever walk of life we travel, whatever we are directing our attention is going to ensure whether it's a success or not. And having that ability to narrow your attention is huge. Tom Heron, thank you very, very much, who I've known for for the next 50 years. Thank you, Tom. Sandy and Sybil, Geraldine Huffman, Emily, which I remember going back quite a few years ago, Terry Patrick, Jerry Coffey, Vart22, Mandy, Lucy, and Joel. Thank you. Hi, Joel. And Lucy Sheng. I'm a yoga instructor. Buteyko breathing technique is a bit different. The same thing as nostril breathing rather than mouth. I do enjoy Buteyko. I suppose the difference with Buteyko and yoga, Lucy, is that Buteyko is about nose breathing 24/7, including sleep. Buteyko is about breathing light. It's about deliberately under breathing to the point of air hunger. and sustaining that feeling of air hunger for a period of time. In order, the premise is to reduce the chemosensitivity to carbon dioxide. Buteyko has techniques to open up the nose. And it also has a measurement called the control pause, so that at least you have some idea where you're going with breathing practice. So, of course, there's going to be some similarities with yoga, but I think there's some things in Buteyko which are beautiful because it's looking at your everyday breathing and it's looking at the biochemistry. How many times do we hear of the instruction to take this full big breath, and without the instructor, and I'm not just saying it's yoga instructor, but any instructor could be saying, take this full big breath, without taking into consideration the impact that may have on the biochemistry. That breathing is not just, I suppose, looking at the biomechanics. Rebecca, Avery, can this help with air trapping and bronchiectasis as well? Air trapping is aerophagia, I think no, you're talking about air trapping in terms of hyperinflation. I've used it with some people with bronchiectasis and I've seen good results. Air trapping can be very much if your control pause is low, so that you're probably having labored breathing at the moment. And as a result, you can't have a complete and natural exhalation because you're caught for breath. Because you don't have a complete and natural exhalation, you have a partial exhalation, and then you breathe in on top of it. So it's called breath stacking. If you go into YouTube and look for the video that I did for long COVID, everything that is applicable to long COVID in the video that I did will be applicable with bronchiectasis, especially if you have air trapping. Because if you have air trapping, your breathing is probably labored, you already have air hunger, your control pause is low. So I'd say start off very gentle. So go to the presentation on long COVID. Same as with people with chronic fatigue syndrome, people with fibromyalgia. So there's a lot of the videos, actually, a lot of the techniques we've put free anyway up in the YouTube channel. Is it okay to tape your mouth if you have mild sleep apnea? Actually, I would absolutely tape the mouth, Taylor, but I would also make sure that you can sustain nasal breathing during wakefulness. So you have to make sure that you can breathe through your nose before you think of taping it. The tape that we use is my own tape. Now, there's a few different tapes out there, but I'm going to show you this one here. This one is Myo tape. So it's a tape. You have to press it on a few times. So basically, it's an elasticated tape. And you take it off and you stretch it about 30%. And it's pulling my lips together now because of the tension. But when you put it on, just press it on a few times. And that's the tape there, Myo tape. So, now we were using 3M 1-inch micropore tape for years. And we were also using lip seal tape is a great tape as well, lip seal tape. So you've got Myo tape, you've got 3M 1-inch micropore, and you've got lip seal. But nasal breathe during the day. And also, because it's how you breathe during the day is going to influence how you breathe during sleep. Like if you think of it this way, if you have somebody with faster and harder breathing during the day, and then those individuals go to sleep, how are they going to breathe during sleep? They are also going to breathe faster and harder. And faster and harder breathing then is increasing turbulence in the upper airways. So when I'm talking about the upper airways, I'm talking about the nasal cavity and the throat itself. And the throat is collapsible. So if you have hard and fast breathing, there's an increased negative pressure. So my talk in terms of, and it's also based on the paper that I wrote with Dr. Carlos O'Connor and Dr. Plaza, is looking at the phenotypes of sleep apnea and bring together functional breathing towards those phenotypes. So in a nutshell, the mouth should be closed and the tongue should be resting in the roof of the mouth. Breathing should be light. Breathing should be slow and breathing should be low. When we breathe with the diaphragm, with good recruitment of the diaphragm, the throat is stiffer and less likely to collapse. When we have the mouth closed and the tongue resting in the roof of the mouth, it helps to open up the airway, so the architecture is better and there's less resistance to breathing. When our breathing is light and slow, our breathing is more stable. And also, it means that if we do stop breathing or if we have a reduction in the flow of our breathing during sleep, that we don't have this exaggerated ventilation post the stopping of the breath. Now, it's a little bit technical. It's called high loop gain. So ultimately, for somebody with sleep, nose breathing is the key. But nose breathing with light breathing, slow breathing, and low breathing. And bear in mind, it's how you breathe during the day, which influences how you breathe during sleep. If you're going around with your mouth open during the day, if you're breathing hard and fast during the day, if you're breathing upper chest during the day, that's ultimately going to influence how you breathe during sleep. And we have to think of the upper airway as it's not just about the airway, it's not just about the anatomy, it's not just about the size of the tube. We also have to consider flow, and flow is your breathing. So to give you this example, I often say to students, make the sound of a snore through your mouth, and it goes like this. And now, if you close your mouth and try and snore with your mouth closed, try and snore through your mouth, with your mouth closed. You'll find that when your mouth is closed, you can't snore through your mouth. And then the second form of snoring is through the nose, and it goes like this. But now, if you breathe really lightly, soft breath in through your nose, and a relaxed and a slow and a gentle exhalation. And a soft breath in through your nose, and a relaxed and a slow and a gentle exhalation. And as you're breathing really lightly, try and snore through your nose. And you'll find it's more difficult. We may not stop nasal snoring altogether, because nasal snoring is going to be influenced by the anatomy. And if there's a deviated septum or enlarged turbinates, etc., it's going to create resistance to breathing. However, it's not just about the anatomy of the nose. A major contributory factor to the turbulence in the upper airway and the negative pressure is how hard and how fast you breathe. So your breathing during the day is very important for your breathing during sleep. John Cahill, have you found any link between nasal breathing and eyesight, Patrick? I haven't, John. I came across, there was a paper written back, God, it's going back about 15 years ago, looking at carbon dioxide in terms of increasing the small blood vessels in the eyes, but there was nothing. I found nothing more on it, so I have nothing on that. Sorry. My daughter is a speech therapist with her own practice. She's all about nose breathing. Well done, Taylor. See, so many problems stem from mouth breathing. That's absolutely tremendous. The smart of art, sleep dysfunctions are getting more and more attention in society, but it is after we have already the bad habit. The only thing that I would say is that sleep dysfunctions are getting a lot more attention, but nasal breathing is not. It's really important in terms of how can we resolve snoring, obstructive sleep apnea, and even insomnia if we are mouth breathing. And the reason being is because even with insomnia, mouth breathing is more likely to put us into that increased sympathetic drive. So insomnia affects more people than snoring and insomnia. And insomnia can happen that you have difficulty falling asleep. And it can be very much due to overstimulation of the mind. You're ruminating in thought, you're lost in thought, you're twisting and turning. If we have a very stressful day, it would impact our ability to fall asleep. And this is where breathing comes in, because with breathing exercises, especially when you breathe light and slow and low, I'm not talking about taking big breaths that you hear. It's not about taking that. It's about breathing. It's about under breathing. It's about breathing less air rather than breathing more air. If you practice tonight for 15 minutes before you go to sleep, taking your attention out of your mind and really slowing down the speed of the breath coming into your nose and having a relaxed and a slow and a gentle exhalation. And then a very, very soft, gentle breath coming into your nose and a relaxed and a slow and a gentle exhalation. And under breathe to the point that you feel that you're not getting quite enough air. Now, if you get panicked or if you have involuntary contractions of the diaphragm, the air hunger has gone a little bit too far. So the main thing to do is just with relaxation, focus on the airflow coming in and out of your nose. You're focusing on the slightly colder air coming into your nose, and you're focusing on the slightly warmer air leaving your nose. And as you focus in your breathing, just gently hint at softening the breath and see if you generate a little bit of air hunger. You should feel that you're not getting enough air. And if you haven't generated air hunger, just drop it again about 10%. Just gently soften your breathing again by 10%. softening the inhalation, and having that really relaxed and slow, gentle exhalation. And then softening the inhalation and having the really relaxed and slow, gentle exhalation. And as you do that, you have to stimulate the vagus nerve and you have to downregulate. So the person with insomnia who is overstimulated, who can't fall asleep so readily, it's very important that they downregulate for about 10 or 15 minutes before sleep. And of course, avoid devices, but get your mouth closed and get your breathing light. The other time that we can wake up with insomnia is maybe 2 o'clock in the morning or 3 o'clock in the morning or 4 o'clock in the morning. And you're waking up and you're lying there. And it's almost that you're in a state of limbo. You're not quite awake enough to get up, but you're not quite tired enough to go back to sleep. Instead of worrying about it, bring your attention inwards. Hold your attention on the breath. And always think that whenever you want to bring the body and mind into relaxation, think of the exhalation. The exhalation should be slow and prolonged. If you breathe out fast, it's a stressor. If you have a really relaxed and a slow and a gentle breath out, your body is telling the brain that everything is okay. And when your body is telling the brain that everything is okay, your brain will send signals of calm back to the body. You will know whether you activate the body's relaxation response by virtue of the change of watery saliva in the mouth. So normally when you practice doing the breathe light, you could have one hand on your chest, one hand just above your navel, and you're really softening the breath, and you're feeling that air hunger, and do it for about 3 to 4 minutes, and then take a break for a minute, and then do it for 3 to 4 minutes again. See, does it influence the temperature of your fingers? See, does it make you feel drowsy? See, does it increase the watery saliva in the mouth? And that's like, I was lucky enough to come across this whenever, this is 1998, and I knew straight off, because that air hunger, I could feel the temperature of my fingers increasing. And what was more, it was doing the opposite, which was typically out there about taking these full big breaths. So here was Buteyko saying the problem is not that you need to breathe more. He said the problem is you need to breathe less. And it was part of his training as a medical doctor that when he was sitting with sick patients' bedsides and observing the breathing of the patients in front of them, he noticed that his patients were breathing hard, fast, upper chest, and often mouth breathing. He asked, was it their sickness which was causing them to breathe this way? Or could it be that their breathing is feeding into their sickness? And he started teaching them, instead of breathing fast, breathe slow. Instead of breathing hard, breathe light. Instead of breathing mouth, breathe nose. And instead of breathing chest, breathe low. All good stuff. Light, slow, deep breathing, nose breathing. And he bases physiology on carbon dioxide, but research has come on quite a lot in the last 30 years. And while carbon dioxide is going to play some role, stimulating the vagus nerve and increasing the sensitivity of the baroreflex, in other words, bring the body into balance, is probably what is really happening. So his patients with different complaints, and when you look at, like, that's why I wrote about it in the breathing cure, people with diabetes, people with epilepsy, people with sleep apnea, people with mental health problems, they're very much in this increased stress response. And how can the body get well if it's in that constant fight or flight response? So by changing breathing patterns, we're looking to get a balance in the autonomic nervous system. And when we have a more balance between the rest and digest and the fight or flight response, when we have increased vagal tone, we're kind of setting the conditions now for the body to be able to heal itself. It's very, very important. So from Karen Stallings, can you please expand on nasal congestion and asthma? Since 2007, Karen, there's been a realization or recognition that it's not just two airways. So when we're talking about the upper airway, we're talking about the nose and the nasal cavity and the throat. And then you have the trachea, the bronchi, the bronchioles, down to the base of the ribs, the diaphragm. So in modern medicine, the upper airway is seen as different from the lower airway. But since 2007, researchers have called it a unified airway. So whatever happens with your lungs can travel upwards. So typically, if you have asthma, it's regarded that there's inflammation in the lungs. Now, there's also constriction with smooth muscle. But inflammation is swelling of the inner walls of the airways. There can be increased amounts of mucus. But if there's inflammation in the lungs, it can travel up to the nose. So people with asthma typically also have nasal congestion. Not everybody, of course. And the problem with nasal congestion is whether you have hay fever or whether it's perennial rhinitis. In other words, you have your nose is stuffy for at least 1 hour a day most days of the year. Your sleep is impacted. So that's why I would say that, and I think most people with asthma don't realize this. You know, they're taking their medication, which is giving them great control of their asthma, but they don't necessarily switch to nose breathing. Their sleep can still be impacted. And by breathing through the nose, I would estimate you could help your asthma by about 20%. And if you practice the Buteyko method and improve your control pause above 20 seconds, the typical results from, there's about 20 plus clinical trials now using Buteyko for asthma. And the typical results would be a 50% less need for medication in about 3 to 6 months. So there's, since the first clinical trial was published in 1998, we're talking about almost 24 years of papers here. And okay, I know you need about 500 papers for something to be accepted in medicine. At the moment, there's 20 plus clinical trials using Buteyko for asthma, but overall, they're pretty positive. And we also have to ask the question, does it make common sense to breathe through the nose? Does it make common sense to practice light, slow, and low breathing? So the smart of art. I'm just coming up to questions here. How do I reduce breathing when I'm sleeping? So it's really about improving your breathing during the day, Joel. And by improving your breathing patterns during the day, your breathing will naturally be lighter and slower during sleep. And of course, even getting the mouth closed during the day, having the tongue resting in the roof of the mouth during the day. And I'm just seeing here, there's so many questions here, so I'm not sure. Sleep dysfunctions from Matthew Roberts. Happy 20th anniversary. This methodology has created such a high impact change to my life and the lives of my loved ones since being introduced to it. Great to hear, Matthew. Thanks very much. The smart of art, I got it from you, and I love the power of now. It's great. From Liat, is it works for elderly exercise-induced asthma? Also, when the CP is more than 30 seconds, no medication needed. It's only your medical doctor who can make a decision with your medication. But typically, if your control pause is measured correctly and it's over 30, you have much better asthma control. And with much better asthma control, then ask your doctor to bring your medication down to where you need. For elderly person, go easy. So don't do any long breath holds or anything like that. You have to go very, very gentle with it. And thank you, Beatrice. My asthma has improved 90% since nose breathing. Well done, Zoltar. And from Tom Evanson, it's always interesting to hear you teaching Buteyko. Thank you, Tom. Donna Flynn, happy anniversary from Toronto. Favorite city of mine. I spent many's a summer there as a child. Humanity is also key in everything. Humans first, and our habitat nature is where is the power. Thank you. And thanks, Patrick. Is it possible to block the nose using the tongue rather than pinching? Using the tongue rather than pinching the. Oh, so you're just saying hold your breath. You could just hold your breath. But I just feel there's a bit of comfort when you physically block it, because then you don't have to think about anything. You don't have to think of your breathing. But the main thing is, you could, if you're going out for a walk in public, you don't want to be walking holding your nose, so you can just stop breathing. Choose the breath, choose the cold water under the guidance of a Buteyko qualified instructor, as we did. Thank you to Brett Delusion and our great friend Kevin, brother Kev, for changing our lives. Thank you, Matthew. From Lucy, thank you. Breed your power. Thank you for your absolute dedication and fastidious research and teaching. Thank you. Rebecca Avery, interesting. You direct me to the long COVID video They think I may have had COVID even though I didn't test positive. Found your problem. Yeah, it's all out there, Rebecca. I've put out one video on COVID going back to March 2020. The quality of the video isn't great, but it's had quite a few views. The more recent one on long COVID is better. And Joel's problem is breathe very small amount during the day. At night I breathe heavy. Make sure as well that the bedroom is cold. Make sure that the bedroom is, well, cool bedroom, airy bedroom, and mouth closed. And measure your control pause, Joel. Measure your control pause. It will give you the best feedback of your breathing. It's not perfect, but at least it gives you a good indicator. I have your tape. Thank you, Taylor. I've started doing the throat and tongue exercises. Great. Maura Collins. Hi, Maura. How are you? Been following your work since 2002. Thank you so much, Maura. You've been great. Deborah Butler, it's working. I'm getting very, very sleepy right now. That was from practicing the exercise. Can you compare Buteyko with the Wim Hof method? Wim Hof method is a stressor breathing exercise. It's involving hyperventilation for maybe 30 breaths, and then an exhale hold. And because you've hyperventilated, getting rid of so much carbon dioxide, you've depleted your alarm to breathe. So the Wim Hof method is hyperventilation, exhale, hold, and then you're holding your breath for maybe 2 to 3 minutes, because you can hold it for so much longer because so much carbon dioxide has been removed from the blood through the lungs during the hyperventilation. So you don't feel a sensation to breathe. And then you breathe in, you might hold a thing for 10 seconds, and then you do another cycle of hyperventilation. It's primarily a stressor. It's a stressor on two fronts. It's a stressor because of the speed of the breathing at the start and the hyperventilation, but also the long breath holds. I would just say this: I've made mistakes with Buteyko, and Buteyko is not as severe as the Wim Hof method. And I have put people into panic attacks, anxiety. I put one guy into accident and emergency. Breathing is very, very powerful. And that's what 20 years teaches you as well. You know, there's people that you have to go very, very easy with. I've had people with chronic fatigue syndrome. I've completely floored them. And I didn't do it intentionally. But breathing is very, very powerful. And for somebody to put out a breathing technique there that everybody can use, that's involving high stress and long breath holds, I would be very cautious. Wim Hof has done so much about breathing, but Wim is a great athlete and he's an extreme athlete. And, you know, in terms of breathing exercise, the one thing about the Buteyko method is that you can gently prescribe different breathing exercise to suit individuals. So an 80-year-old person with labored breathing, we can give them a breathing approach. People with long COVID, you will see the approach with long COVID. It's up on YouTube. It's an hour. It's very gentle because we're helping to stimulate the vagus nerve for recovery. It's not just about stressing the body and mind. We have to recover. We have to look at sleep. And we also have to look at everyday breathing. So there's some similarities with Wim Hof method in terms of doing a long breath hold, but other than that, there's they're different. They're different. So from Divyam Yoga, thanks very much. From Maria, hi Maria in Romania, and from Dermot, do you know if there's a biography? We have a page of a summary of his history, Dermot, and you'll find it. I think it's up Buteyko Clinic. Patrick, you haven't read my comment or answered my questions, please. I didn't see it. There's a lot of them here and I'm on my own, and I've scrolled down through it as well. There's probably about 40 or 50 comments, so 11507, and I don't see yours a second time I'm after scrolling down through it. So sorry about that. Is yawning good or bad? I don't know if anybody knows why do we really yawn. Now, when you do the Buteyko method and really light and slow and soft breathing, you can feel drowsy and you can start to yawn. So if you're yawning as a result of doing the exercises, it's good because you know you're down regulating. But if you're yawning all the time, I would say that there could be dysfunctional breathing there, because sometimes it's common for people with dysfunctional breathing to be yawning excessively or sighing excessively. So I would say, if you are yawning quite frequently, I would be practicing Buteyko method. It'll help you anyway in different ways. So it's worth doing. How do I increase my bolt score? It's really about bolt score and the control pause, the same thing. It's really about putting this all into practice. It's not just about nose breathing. It's about breathing light. It's about breathing slow. It's about doing your physical exercise with the mouth closed. It's about getting the mouth closed during sleep. It's about putting this into practice 40 to 60 minutes a day. But do you get out for a walk during the day? Can you bring in half an hour walk, half an hour functional breathing, reduced volume breathing? Can you do 10 or 15 minutes before you go to sleep? Could you do 10 or 15 minutes when you get up first thing in the morning? So there is a little bit of work involved in it, but I will say it can make a significant difference. And whatever time that you put in with your breathing practice, you'll get back anyway, because you have better energy, more productive, more intuitive. I would say more creative, because you have that quietness of the mind and to allow solutions to come up, and overall happiness, because if we're ruminating and thought all the time, it's not a recipe for happiness. Kate, you skipped my question after that. It's kind of strange, Kate, because I don't see. Oh yeah, what training would be best? I see it here. What training would be best for a yoga teacher, Patrick? The online cert and the Buteyko method, or the oxygen advantage functional? You could do both. Or sorry, you could do either of them. Probably the oxygen advantage won't be the best one, because we do it half and half. You're talking about the oxygen advantage functional breathing and structure. I would probably do the Buteyko method if you were doing it, comparing it to the functional breathing, because there's more on the Buteyko method than the functional breathing. Or if you were to do the oxygen advantage advanced yoga, might be the better one. But you could do either or, because both of them will apply. And Dermot is talking about Amaze Fit Band 5 is a great little device. Thank you, Dermot. Congratulations. Thank you, Zane. Is there a cure for rhinitis? Do the nose unblocking exercises. They're all available. Download our app. Our app is free. It's Buteyko Clinic. You'll see it in Android and you'll see it in on iTunes. And you've got all of the exercises as well that are free for children. And there's some of the exercise for adults. The nose unblocking is there. And you'll see the steps exercise if you're suitable to doing them. You'll see them in the app. You'll also see a lot of the exercise for rhinitis. The videos are on our YouTube channel for free. What are the tongue and throat exercises? Rebecca, they are myofunctional therapy. So it's a different discipline, but often goes hand in hand with what we do. So they have different exercises for the tongue and for the throat to help strengthen the muscle, or not necessarily strengthen, but to improve tone and to improve function. How do I enroll in the Buteyko method breathing courses, workshops? I think you can sign up online, 115507, or you can send Anna an email, info@buteykoclinic.com, info@buteykoclinic.com. With breathing, your brain can recognize creativity and you have clarity about it. Thank you, Smart of Art. Really helped my golf. Appreciate the beauty of the course now rather than stressing over lost balls. That's always good. Thank you so much, everybody. And I'm going to draw to a close. So enjoy your evening. And yeah, so it's going to be an interesting few years. I think the future is very promising. We, with your help, we have made so much, progress in terms of the awareness and the understanding of breathing. And breathing for the people. So let's go with that. Thanks so much, everybody. Take care. Bye.